Hello, hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into the Odd Thoughts Podcast. At the Odd Thoughts Podcast, we like to talk about the everyday odd thoughts, have conversations on relatable topics, and discuss whatever comes to mind. My name is Gunther, and I am your host. Welcome to episode 49. For episode 49, I wanted to start off by talking about what social cues are. Outside of just your basic like verbal communications, there are certain nonverbal ways you can express and emphasize what you're trying to say. Then I wanted to transition into talking about some movies that are turning 20 years old in 2024. Some movies that came out in 2004 that, in my opinion, have aged pretty well, that very much so are stuck in my brain till this day. Next, I wanted to talk about depression. I'm someone that suffers from depression, and I've mentioned it through topics before, but I've never really delved into it. And I wanted to talk about that kind of persistent feeling of emptiness that people might feel, and that self-loathing and that low self-esteem that kind of encompasses inside of depression. Lastly, I wanted to end it on talking about job interviews. I don't really love job interviews, but obviously, when you want to work somewhere, you're going to have to give a job interview, and you want to try to portray yourself as a capable and excellent person for that job. So, if you want to listen to any of these topics, please continue tuning in. I appreciate everybody's for tuning in as always. But before we step into the episode further, how's everybody doing? I hope everybody's doing okay. I'm doing all right myself. I've got a couple more episodes until I'm going to take a short little break. I don't know how long I'm going to take. It'll at least be a couple weeks. I just want to, like I've said this before, but reiterate things on the, or like readjust things on the podcast and maybe try to think of ways to take it off the podcast or whatever. And I always think of the podcast as more like a video essay kind of thing where it's like, even though there's no video, it's just like a podcast audio with a few video cards, a few graphics. But my whole thing is that like I kind of just like having topics and then I like just trying to talk through these thoughts. I write them down and I try to like talk about them as, thoroughly as possible. And with podcasting, like there's something that kind of more lies with it. It's more like I think suited for having open conversations in general, talking about whatever. And I talk about whatever, but I do outline every podcast with like specific things and specific points I want to hit on and all that kind of stuff. And, I like that kind of thing, but I do question whether it's like, best suited for a podcast form. You know what I'm saying? Like I always try to say that I'm thinking of other content and I think I've teased it before, thinking about what I want to do and, XYZ, trying to think about everything I want to try to do. And with like these topics, like when I think of something to talk about and I kind of look up and research and do my little stuff and I create that outline, it works for my pod. It makes me feel good when I get on the microphone and I'm thoroughly talking about something. It makes me, as I just want to be understood. That's like my whole thing is I want to incite people to think on their own as well, just through being understood. But I know that I maybe can take it outside of podcasting and I can take these topics and I've always wanted to put have like video and actually put myself on camera. And so I kind of think like instead of just podcasting, like I can just like sit down and have like a little sit down and talk to y'all about these things and show myself and I can if I maybe a little more thorough, I won't do it for like 12 to 15 minutes, but make shorter videos on that kind of stuff. And that's just like a thought. That's kind of like the whole thing is I kind of like that and maybe it feels a little more personable and I can kind of like I can what am I trying to say? Like lengthen out or like, like set out the episodes a little bit more, or the topics a little more like spaced and stuff like that. I can don't have to feel like I have to jumble up a bunch of topics into one episode. So that sometimes is a hard thing is like trying to figure out like what I want to talk about in a specific episode, like all the topics I want to talk about and if they fit together or not. So I kind of think about that. I kind of think about if I can, shorten the, what I'm trying to say with each topic and, trying to like, maybe get on the camera and just singularize each topic and talk about it individually. That's kind of an idea. Also, just in general, like I said, the podcasting fits better with I think sometimes like open conversation where like you might have some things you want to talk about, but you want to keep it very open and have like your opinion flow off the top. And I don't mind that. And so let's say I do keep the podcast going, right? Like try to throw more of that in there. I want to talk about like more real life events and more real world topics. So that would be more like a good way to do it. I can give the facts of both sides and all sides kind of encompassing something and just give my own feel type thing. And as well as still trying to throw in some serious topics. Just try like because like I've been throwing in like a couple topics. Like in this episode, I'll talk about job interviews, and that one's a little more free flowing. I don't have a lot written about that. I just kind of like know what's on the top of my head type thing. But yeah, like I said, doing a couple more until I take a break, and then I'm thinking of other content and whatnot. Whatever. Let's continue on though. Let's go ahead and hop into episode 49. When you are socializing with someone or communicating with other people, it's very easy to express yourself or relatively easy to express yourself through just using words. But sometimes there are other ways outside of just words that you can communicate what you're trying to get across. There are certain like social cues that people do or you yourself do that can portray the point you're trying to make or the certain emotion you're trying to put behind something through your facial expressions, your body language, maybe how you like say a certain word or how you're talking, the tone or pitch. I'm not necessarily great with like social skills, and I'm not like I'm not good with talking to people sometimes. And so sometimes even with like social cues, the nonverbal things I don't always pick up on, but for other people, social cues are ways to kind of read people. Social cues are strictly just like how to communicate without words. It's other ways to express yourselves outside of just that basic verbal communication, ways to emphasize that verbal communication. There's certain ways to do it, like, if you're, slouched a little bit or, maybe like your eyes are kind of raised up and other things, literally like little behaviors you can do that kind of show an emphasis in the conversation you're having. Sometimes outside of just like a conversation you're having, you can sometimes use these social cues and certain gestures to portray something without even any words at all. Like I said, I'm not necessarily great with social skills. So some people like me, when you're not good with that kind of socializing ability, social cues kind of are, they can either be like the one thing you pay attention to, or they can also be kind of hard to pick up on. Like I feel like I have a total lack of no ability in socializing. Like I can talk to people, but it's like I'm kind of what is it like ditzy a little bit in some ways, a little like I don't always understand. But also at times I've been the one to maybe overread social cues. I kind of overthink, how people like are like standing or how their faces look and stuff like that. Some people are just, they don't know in their own rights. And sometimes it's like one of those things where social cues can be kind of unconscious in some ways. Like you just don't know you're making a certain face or you're slouched or you're positioned a certain way, yada yada. But a lot of times social cues and like stuff like that can be affected by like people's personalities and their comfort level with someone or even like culture. Like, some cultures, they stand a certain way or they use their hands more or something like that. And like, people who have like more exciting personalities or they have like those more upbeat personalities, it feels like they're more expressive outside of their words, right? And then yeah, very much so like comfort levels. Like when you're comfortable with someone, you're gonna be more willing to like, let your body show, emotion, let your face show it as well. But there are certain like I think, I read something that it said 60 to 65% of communication is nonverbal. Like a lot of the way that people understand communication and how you communicate is through the things you don't say. And I don't like I think people may struggle. I know I struggle with picking up on clues, you know what I'm saying? So, but when people have these certain social cues, they're just trying to portray like a certain emotion. They're trying to make have a certain intent or something like that. It's portraying things outside of the words. That's really what it is. It's just adding to the conversation. and I think you can misinterpret it. I think like I have. So it's hard to like always be like so like knowledgeable about like or like always be able to pick up on it more. So not knowledgeable, but like always easily pick up on that kind of thing because it's hard for me. I know for a fact. But there are different types of like ways that people use like or like show these social cues. There's like one of the main ways that I always kind of think of is like, you know, with your face and your body. So like when your body language, that's what people a lot of people talk about is like the posture, you know, how people you know, stand towards you. Are they like are they kind of like, you know, comfortable and they got kind of more of an open, you know, stance or are they like arms folded, kind of closed off or whatever? That's kind of one way to show. It shows like a certain comfort level and it shows like a certain like, you know, like yeah, a certain willingness to even like engage with you, right? There's also like an angling of the body. Like you know, how you position facing someone that kind of shows like a certain like level of engagement or like a certain level of like attentiveness or whatever. And then like with like I something I do a lot is like right now is I talk with my hands, I gesture a lot. That's like something I do a lot. And it's like the perfect like emphasizing of like what I'm saying. I always feel like it like can you know, I use my hands to like move through the story or move through what I'm saying. It's something my mom used to do a lot, still does a lot. So it's like it's just funny. It's just something that sticks in my mind and it I always do. And even with things like you mirroring you know, I talked about mirroring in, like in a recent episode a couple episodes ago or whatever. That's kind of the unconscious like copying of someone, right? It's not like a mimicking, it's mimicking but it's not mocking. It's just like, you know, you act the same as someone else to kind of show that you're paying attention or show that you're comfortable with listening or whatever. And then there's things like fidgeting. Like some people like, you know, I'm a fidgeter. I do little small stimming gestures or whatever. And something that helps me kind of focus and keeps me kind of like, you know, it keeps me like honed in. But I know that I read somewhere that it says that it interprets it as disinterested for some people. So if you're kind of fidgety, it kind of makes it feel like some people might feel like you're not into what they're saying, you're not attentive. But for me, it's like something like for some people, it's just like something you do to focus. But also like, you know, touching. It's kind of like touching is like, you know, when you touch someone, it can be a sign of like intimacy or like how close you are to someone, or sometimes it can be used for like a certain social dominance, which is kind of interesting. Like, you know, you put your hand on someone's back because you care about them. Maybe you're giving them like a nice, like soft touch, or you like kind of put, or like you give a hard handshake, and that's how you assert dominance or something. Like, always with consent, hopefully. Don't be touching people without their consent. But body language is kind of one of the bigger things I think of. Like, that to me maybe is more like, you know, betrayable. Like, you can understand that a little bit more. Then very much so also is facial expressions. It's like I'm someone that I have sometimes an expressive face, so I don't know when I'm have like a look of anger or fear or amusement or like confusion or sad. I don't always know if I am. Like I don't always know if I'm showing that. But, you know, facial expressions are like the perfect way for a lot of people to convey a variety of different emotions. It's literally that whole thing. It's like, you know, if someone like with their eyes, if they got like the wide eyes, that might mean they're kind of surprised. If they're kind of like eyebrows up and they got the big eyes, you know, or something like that, or maybe they're a little more like tensed up and they're kind of angry or they're confused or something like that. Or like, you know, you could tell someone is smiling without the smile because there's like little wrinkles, right? So, or dilated pupils might show like a certain around, like you know, a certain attraction or arousal or something like that, excitement or something like that. Eye contact, just besides like the look of the eyes, like it's real like having eye contact with someone shows attentiveness. Sometimes prolonged eye contact can make people feel, you know, a little bit weird. But that's like a very expressive thing, you know, like very much so, you know, the high eyebrows or yeah, you think about like when you're a little angry, you kind of furrow your eyes or whatever, you know. That's so funny to think about. That's very much so a readable thing. I think the eye like I'm someone that believes the eyes can tell a lot. You know, I love eyes. That's like one of the most attractive features on people, I think, is the eyes. So that's something I pay attention to a lot. But also with like the mouth, like that's something, you know, very obvious too. Like if someone's kind of looking at you, like you tell them something and they got like the, you know, jaw drop, that might mean that they're shocked by what you said, right? Or Or maybe they look like they want to say something. They got the tight lips and they look like they're kind of fuming or something like that. Or like when they're happy, their corners are turned up. When they're sad, their corners are turned down. So it's literally like it's all that kind of stuff. Even with like the volume in which you speak about something can show a certain passion, right? A certain like a tempo in which you say something or whatever. That's a whole thing too. And that kind of goes into like that kind of goes into like the vocal thing too. But there's so many different things like, changing your pitch and stuff like that. Like I'm someone like, I think that sometimes I can get very passionate and I have a voice that like projects, like I like it just carries. So when I get passionate about stuff, I get really loud. And that's not something that like I always mean to do, right? Like that's not something I always mean to do, but it's what happens. And when you're, angry at something, you might get a little more like rough with your voice, or, if you're happy about something, you're kind of cheery and it's up in tone and stuff like that. It can like it portrays how you want it to feel through like your speaking, right? That's a big thing. Like that kind of goes with the vocal changing and goes with that kind of thing. Whatever. I kind of confused myself a little bit. But also I was reading something like proximity is like a thing too. Like literally how close you stand to someone is a very big teller. It's a type of social cue. And that kind of makes sense, right? You first meet someone, or you're meeting someone out in public that you don't know. You're not going to stand necessarily super close to someone unless like you want to hear them or something like that, unless it's a specific purpose. But and then you got someone that you're like very close to. You might stand obviously just close to them by nature because you're close to them. It kind of indicates that certain comfort level. I don't really stand close to people in general. I just feel weird that like if I'm like hunching over someone, or like or like like someone could smell me even though I don't smell bad. Like I just think like people think I smell. I don't. That's my mind. That's how I think. But very much so. Like you can classify all these different types of social cues, but it's not like for some people it's very easy to pick up on social cues, and like sometimes like you just don't think you can, and you have the ability to, but there are times when it's kind of a difficult thing to read social cues. And I'm always very much so a person that I wish that people would just be kind of upfront and just say what they mean and just tell me straight up and stuff like that. But sometimes it's hard for people to express themselves through words, so those social cues help with that. And I think like, I'm not like not everyone is adept to reading social cues. I'm very much so not. And, you know, people interpret things and perform social cues very differently. And I think like, certain like social conditions like autism or like ADHD or social anxiety can like limit the ability to read social cues, and maybe even limit the way you express yourself through social cues. I have very bad social anxiety, very much so. So I'm already like predisposed in a tense like position, I think, all the time. And when I'm out in public, I'm already kind of like on edge, so probably not very approachable in that sense. And like I kind of look like I'm always nervous, and I am. Like I'm nervous most of the time. About what? I don't know. But also ADHD. Like I have ADHD, and it just makes me hard to pay attention to things. And sometimes like I'm paying attention to what you're saying, but I'm not like looking at you. And that could just be because of like XYZ, ABC. Well, I like how I like to say it. But you can if you're maybe, practicing is like a weird thing to do. Building up social skills is like the overall of what you do to understand it kind of thing. Like you got to put yourself in around people. You got to talk to people. Maybe try to pay attention to what people are saying, especially like if you're comfortable with someone already, like they're going to be pretty honest with you anyways. Like they're not going to hold back maybe what they say, and they're not going to hold back how they express themselves. So that's something like when you start to pay attention to that kind of stuff, that's the only way you can like learn, I guess, social skills and in those social cues or whatever. But maybe even getting feedback, like tell people like, did I misinterpret what you say, or like kind of reiterating like is this what you're trying to tell me? Is like are you upset about this? Like sometimes you got to be just so blatant with that kind of thing. And even if it's awkward to kind of ask, straight up, but you just got to be honest a little bit. That's something like I say, I struggle very much with social skills in general, and I don't always pick up on social cues. And because of my social anxiety and my kind of general like awkwardness at times, like I don't give off social cues very much. Maybe in my face more, but definitely not my body. But social cues are, like I said, are just they're that nonverbal communication. They emphasize the words you're saying, or at times can, communicate something without even having to say anything. And it can be difficult to interpret it, or it can be very straight up, and people are kind of letting out what they're trying to say. However, social skills, it's hard to gain sometimes. And like I said, social cues just help emphasize, what people are trying to say. I ask of y'all just for a few minutes to come back in time with me, hop in my imaginary time machine, and we're going to head back 20 years ago to the year 2004. For some reason in my head, I think like 20 years ago is the 90s, but we're long gone from that. We're far from that. One of my I was 7 going on 8 in 2004. I literally turned 8 in August. And I always think around that age, around like 7, 8, 9, you're growing as like a kid in the sense of like you're gaining a concept of who you are. You're gaining a concept of like personal identity, if you will. You start to realize maybe your favorite like movies and your favorite like music and all these or your favorite things and like what you're interested in. I kind of feel like that's the age and when a lot of things start to pop up. And I can kind of remember around that age, around like 8 years old, 7, 8, that like that's when movies and music really started popularizing for me. I thought I was kind of reminiscent. I was thinking about like, I was randomly thinking about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, things like that. And I was thinking about movies from 20 years ago, films turning 20 years old in 2024. We're only a couple months in, but we've got a long ways to go. But just to think that a lot of these movies I was rating, there's a lot of insanely good movies that I still watch today that I remember vividly that are turning 20 this year. So I thought it was kind of fun. I thought it would be kind of fun to. I'm gonna try to run through the list kind of quick. I'm gonna talk about. I'll do the top 10 grossing movies and like the top 10 money makers, and then I'll fly through a bunch of movies that I kind of highlighted. I'm not gonna talk about every one of them, but I'll talk about some of my favorites or whatever. I'm leaving out a few. Like I know that I'm leaving out a few, but I'm just highlighting some. You can go look at it yourself. But come along with me for a second. Ride the nostalgia train with me, please. But top 10 grossing movies of 2020 of 2004. Sorry, not getting ahead of myself. Top 10 grossing movies of 2004. Number 1 was Shrek 2, which is kind of I never realized Shrek was that early into the 2000s. That thing made $441 million. I love Shrek 1. Nothing's gonna beat Shrek 1. Number 2 on the list was Spider-Man 2, $373 million. It's oh man, it's one of my. I mean, like oh man, I don't know. Like I love the first one, but that second one really honed everything in for me. I love the Tobey Maguire like Spider-Man. So number 3 on the list was The Passion of the Christ, $369 million. And I didn't watch that until a little later in life, like a couple years later. And that movie's intense, and it's something that I never thought like I'd ever want to watch. And I don't think I really even understood it when I watched it, but as I watch it when I've gotten older, it still holds up, and it's an amazing movie. Number 4 on the list was Meet the Fockers, $279 million. I can really care less about that movie. Sorry. Meet the Parents was funny. Meet the Fockers is just the same formula. Number 5 on the list is The Incredibles, $261 million. I love The Incredibles, and when that second one came out a few years ago, a little while ago, I guess now, I thought I was like that was for the people from 2000, like all those like millennials and early like Gen Zers growing up watched The Incredibles. Now they're in their 20s watching The Incredibles too. That's who it was made for. But it's my favorite, probably Disney movie, like Pixar movie. I think so. Number 6 on the list was Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Sorry, $249 million, which is insane. It's I kind of remember that one specifically, and then I remember Goblet of Fire a little bit more. But I would say that's probably the Goblet of Fire is probably my favorite one. But those two were amazing for me. They were like the ones that I really remember growing up. Number 7 on the list is The Day After Tomorrow. which was that like super storm like apocalyptic kind of movie. It made $186 million. Jake Gyllenhaal, Dennis Quaid, I think, right? Number 8 on the list was The Bourne Supremacy, which was the second Bourne movie, $176 million. That's kind of how as a kid, I remember Matt Damon through the Bourne movies, and then you start to discover more, and you're like, oh, Saving Private Ryan and Good Will Hunting, obviously, and stuff like that. But Bourne movies are great. They should never replace them. And then when they brought them back after the Jeremy Renner one, pretty funny. Number 9 on the list is National Treasure, $173 million. I love National Treasure. I think both of them are great. I'm still waiting, or I think they did do like another one. I just never watched that. I know Nicolas Cage is probably never coming back to the series, but I love that whole like the Gates family, and I love that whole thing. And it makes me. I mean, I love adventure movies, and I love treasure hunting. Yada yada. My dad. It's from my dad. Da da da. But then number 10 to round out the top 10 grossing movies, The Polar Express, $162 million. I remember watching that as a kid. It was like literally one of those things where, like in school, when you'd watch Christmas movies in class, The Polar Express always popped up around that time specifically too. And whatever, it's not my favorite Christmas movie, but it's still good. It still holds up. I watched it this Christmas with my dad and stuff like that. But those are the top tens. A couple of those movies, very much so, some of my favorite movies. Like, National Treasure is one of my favorite movies. The Incredibles is probably my favorite Pixar movie. Spider-Man 2 is great. Like, those are great movies. Very much so makes sense. That's just a little taste of what came out in 2004. Like I said, I came up with a list. It's a bunch of them, so I'm gonna kind of fly through them, not really talk about all of them deeply, but I did highlight a couple that I want to at least shout out. You know what I'm saying? And I tried to also line them up in like chronological order, like how they were released through the year, mostly trying to keep with that like formula. I don't remember how well I did. I think I kind of did okay. But so I'll just start listening. The Butterfly Effect, which was that movie with Ashton Kutcher, Amy Smart, absolutely awesome. I literally remember watching that as a kid, and it made me uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. It is an uncomfortable movie, but it was like weird to see Kelso hopping outside that movie, or if you want to say like, from Dude, Where's My Car? I don't remember his name from Dude, Where's My Car, but thinking of that, Chester and I can't remember. Never mind. Jesse and Chester. I think he's Jesse. Dude, oh yeah, I'm pretty proud of myself to remember that Jesse and Chester. Anyways, it's a great movie and it was uncomfortable. It's a thriller, kind of suspenseful movie, and it literally was like, like I didn't know who Eric Stoltz was. He's the dad that like films what I'm saying, if you know that scene. I didn't know who Eric Stoltz was, and I like hated him just because of that one role. But then, like, if you ever watched like The Mask, not the Jim Carrey one, but the one about the actual dude who had like the disformity in his face, yada yada. He's a good actor. Also, Pulp Fiction, yada yada. But also okay. So continuing on the list, You Got Served, Catch That Kid. Literally, Catch That Kid was Kristen Stewart. That's like the earliest thing I kind of remember Kristen Stewart in. 51st Dates, Adam Sandler, Drew Barrymore at their best. Like kind of started that whole relationship between them. They did a couple movies together. Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen. I had to put it there. I literally had to put it there. It's my favorite Lindsay Lohan movie, and she also did Mean Girls. I'm pretty sure this year too. So she really freaking like aced it that year. Starsky and Hutch. Like I didn't know who Starsky. I didn't know what Starsky and Hutch was. I didn't know it was a TV show. But very much so. Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson, just a good pair. Literally, they make like a perfect pair. Like you see it in Zoolander. Starsky and Hutch just made sense that they would work together in that way, and unbelievably funny. Always going to be unbelievably funny. It's a cop. It's a buddy cop movie, and it's funny as hell. Um, Agent Cody Banks too. The second one, sorry, and it's like Destination London. I'm gonna shout this movie out because I love the Cody Banks stuff. I love those movies. That's how I remember Frankie Muniz, or it's from Stay Alive as well. But I literally have like in the last month, no joke, have watched Agent Cody Banks 2 twice. I'm just laying it in there, man. I love that movie, and the whole London vibe, and I kind of like that whole thing. And um, it's got the dude from one of the kids that's in like the orchestra is like one of the dudes from Game of Thrones. I always also think of John Wick. He's the guy that like kills John Wick's dog and like steals his car. He does the yeah, what is it good for? He does that. It's him. I laugh every time. Dawn of the Dead also came out in 2004, the remake of Dawn of the Dead. That's one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite zombie movies. Both versions, I think I prefer the original, but the new one, like that 2004 one, was amazing, and it brings the grittiness of early 2000s horror, kind of the viscera of Saw or like Hostel and stuff like that. Um, Scooby Doo 2, the second Scooby Doo, I love the first one because it's like them coming back together after they split, and I like the spooky island whole thing. I love that, but the second one was great. The creating the monsters, they had the whole headquarters thing. I love that movie. The live action Scooby Doo's are amazing. I love Scooby Doo in general, but the live action Scooby Doo's are the best. Hellboy, which I do remember Hellboy. I didn't know it was a comic book, but Ron Perlman just absolutely destroys that part in a good way. And it's, Guillermo del Toro's mind. It's like how it works. It's just amazing. Walking Tall. Literally another movie I've watched twice in the last month or something like that. It's like the only rock movie I can really watch and like not be like totally like think of him wrestling, right? It's like the one, even though he's got some wrestling ass scenes in that movie. Sorry for my language. I just like it's hard to think of him outside of wrestling. But Walking Tall is a good movie. Coming back to a small town and righting the wrongs of the town and taking back what's right, and opening back up the mill and closing down the casino type thing. Which I don't think they closed down the casino. I think they just like bring back a different ownership type thing. Excuse sorry, excuse me. Excuse me, golly, sorry. But also Kill Bill 2, Volume 2, Kill Bill Volume 2. 13 going on 30, which is funny. Envy, which is like one of my favorite Ben Stiller, Jack Black. Like that's a good underrated movie. Also, what Amy Poehler and who's Ben Stiller's wife in it? I can't remember. Amy Poehler's Jack Black's wife. They make the Vaporize. I love that movie. Mean Girls. Like I said, that's Lindsay Lohan killed it this year. New York Minute, which is Olsen twins. It's like one of the last movies I think they did. I actually think it's like the last movie they did, and I'm not joking on that. I love New York Minute. I have no shame in that. Um, Super Size Me came out in 2004. I remember watching it around that time and then watching it years later in health class. And it don't gross me out. I'm sorry. It does gross me out, but it don't gross me out because I understand fast food is bad for you. Understood it back in 2004, but it's good. I like McDonald's. They don't do the supersizing thing anymore, which blew my mind that was a thing. Van Helsing came out as well in 2004. Troy, which is my little sister's boyfriend Robert's like one of his favorite movies. Soul Plane. I'm ready for like a remake of Soul Plane. Like we got all these remakes of movies happening, like Soul Plane, or like let's remake that. Let's remake it. I want that. I want it so bad. Napoleon Dynamite. I will always say that Napoleon Dynamite is easily one of my favorite movies, probably a top five for me. It shaped my sense of humor, everything about it. That the deadpanness, the like sarcasticness behind everything. It also like, if you've ever spent some time in a small town, like in the middle of nowhere, you know what the vibes are. It's very much so like you get it. And everybody's met a kid like Napoleon Dynamite. Everybody knows that kid. Such a good movie. I love that movie. You know, I can quote that movie all day. Anyway, I won't do it because that's just too long, too much of the podcast. Dodgeball came out at that year. Dodgeball's everybody's favorite, literally one of the classics. Around the World in 80 Days. I forgot that movie kind of existed. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little ashamed of it. But that's Jackie Chan. That was kind of like, Jackie Chan outside of like when he was trying to do a little more family friendly things, like how every actor does. White Chicks came out in 2004. Anchorman came out. The Notebook came out in 2004. Cinderella Story. Catwoman, very famously one of the worst. And it's one of the worst not because of Halle Berry. It's just it wasn't good. It just wasn't good. It just was written weird. The CGI was a little weird. iRobot, did I say that already? No. iRobot came out in 2004. The first the Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle came out in 2004, which was hilarious. I should have never watched that as a kid. I should have never referenced that stuff like the battle shit scene. Excuse my language, but that scene literally makes me die every single time. And I'm not like a potty humor person. I don't like that stuff. So that scene though, it makes me laugh every single time, dude. The Village. The Village. Yeah, that's M Night Shyamalan. It's like one of his like it kind of was a period after like Signs where he wasn't like it just a couple misses, you know. Open Water, a movie I still to this day have watched probably a handful of times. I will not watch it. It literally opened up me to the fear of water and the open water and being like abandoned out in the ocean. And it's to me way scarier than being like abandoned out in space or anywhere else. Open water is scary. The Princess Diaries 2, which kind of forgot was a movie as well. That's when she actually tries to take over Genovia or whatever. The first Alien versus Predator, which is kind of, they kind of got a little, they did like a couple of them, like Requiem and stuff like that and whatever. But it's a good movie nonetheless. It's literally like the clash of titans. It's this scary alien versus the badass action predator. Excuse my language. Um, Without a Paddle. It's one of my favorite comedies still till this day. It's got Matthew Lillard from Scooby Doo, Shaggy from Scooby Doo. It's also Seth Green, Dax Shepard, very very much so a pairing, a trio that I never knew I needed in an adventure movie. Literally friends getting together like a Goonies grown up type thing. Going on this adventure trying to look for DB Cooper's cash. That's so funny to me, man. I love that. And adventure movies all the day long. Um, Resident Evil Apocalypse. That was the second Resident Evil movie. I think they just solidified how badass it was, but then I think it kind of fell off after that. Like I think the third one was Extinction, and it just wasn't that great. Apocalypse is amazing. It kind of takes you, into the world of instead of outside. It's outside of the Umbrella Labs into the city of the Raccoon City. Like I love that. Um, Mr. 3000 and I just in Wimbledon, both those I just wanted to put them back to back, and they like came out relatively close to each other. Just honing in on the sports vibes, Mr. 3000 was Bernie Mac. He's like the retired baseball player. Thought he had 3,000 hits, but it turned out he was like a couple short, so he comes back and like gets the 3,000. Or does he get 3,000? I can't remember. I keep thinking he retired at 299, 2999, and just like said whatever, it doesn't matter type thing. But I love that movie. And then on Wimbledon, it's the tennis one with Paul Bettany and Kirsten Dunst. It's my romantic comedy of choice. James McAvoy also he plays like his brother. What's Jamie Lannister? I forget his name. Nicolaj, whatever his name is. So funny, dude. And I love Wimbledon. I think it's a good movie. Shaun of the Dead. Literally, Dawn of the Dead comes out earlier in the year. Shaun of the Dead. It's not a parody of Dawn of the Dead, but it's not even like a parody. Like it's hard to say that because it's not parodying zombie movies. It's just playing comedy into the zombie genre. And I think everybody loves Shaun. If I don't know, everybody loves Shaun of the Dead, but I think if you watched it, you love it type thing, right? It's your everyday average Joe getting into the zombie apocalypse. I think it's something that we all can kind of tune into and love. I'll try to fly through the last few here. I got a few more. Shark Tale came out that year. Taxi, which is Queen Latifah and Jimmy Fallon, like when he was trying to do movies. Friday Night Lights, which is based off the book. One of my favorite movies. Just a good high school football movie. I love that movie. Team America World Police. Matt Damon. Matt Damon. Me and Dad, every time Matt Damon comes on screen, anytime I watch Matt Damon doing anything, I can't help but think of Team America World Police. Um, the American version of The Grudge came out in 2004. Scared the living shit out of me at that time. Excuse my language, but it's one of my favorites. Ray came out that time. Jamie Foxx doing Ray Charles. I literally remember watching it at the time. It became like one of my favorite movies as a kid, and it still is. It's a great story and a human story about a man that struggled not just with blindness overall, but fame and life and like things, just all that kind of stuff. And Saw came out in 2004 as well. It started that whole like torture porn-ish horror, like just over graphic, like horror, bloody, gory stuff. And it can be, the first one's not that bad. They eventually really leaned into it. And I don't really like love watching the Saw movies, but the story behind the Saw movies, they got like it's like soap opera addict. It's like they like every movie they tease like another thing that leads into the next part of the story. You gotta watch. If you just cut out all the kills, it'd be just like a long, like continuation of a soap opera, basically. Um, a Seed of Chucky came out in 2004, which was like the end of like the original run of Chucky movies, kind of, and it was put on pause for a few years until it came back, and Seed of Chucky was just like the down point, like the ultimate down point of that franchise. Um, Mickey's Twice Upon a Time. I talked about it in like my favorite Christmas movies episode, so I won't talk about it further. But that came out in 2004. I didn't think about it, but it was funny to see it come up. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Now I kind of thought that was a lie for a second. I didn't think about it, but I was about eight. I was about eight when that came out. It would came out later in the year, and I was about that time period. And SpongeBob was famous in the late '90s and stuff like that, so it would make sense that would be the timing. But okay. So the last few, I'll fly through the last few. Yeah, Blade Trinity came out in 2004, literally the down point of Blade. The end of the Blade franchise. Ocean's 12, which was I've never really been into the Ocean's movies, but heist movies are very cool. Million Dollar Baby, Clint Eastwood, Hilary Swank. Hilary Swank's one of my favorite actresses. How can you want anything more? Lemony Snickets came out in 2004. I think just like extending the Jim Carrey fanfare, just absolutely like perfect for him. Like he just laid into that character with everything he had. Hotel Rwanda. If you ever want to watch a very sad movie, a very real human story, that's amazing. And Don Cheadle, just absolutely like he had Ocean's 12 and Hotel Rwanda come out like right after each other, which is unbelievable. Just absolutely great stretch. The Aviator, which is about Howard Hughes. And if you ever want to know a really cool story and a story about a brilliant mind kind of being dwindled down into nothingness, Howard Hughes is someone you should look up. And very much so, like in just in his life, he was one of the most brightest minds ever. And then lastly on the list, gotta save the best for last, is Fat Albert. That's the last I have on my list, which was the live action Fat Albert. Had like Keenan Thompson and had like Marquise Houston. Um, Ayla Pratt, is that what her name? Platt or whatever? Was that her name? I can't remember. That's disrespectful. I should have remembered that. I think it actually has Marquise Houston and then fucking it has Omarion. Yeah, they're brothers. I'm pretty sure. I don't. Maybe I'm tripping on that. I think they're brothers or cousins or something like that. But yeah, that's just a few movies, right? Just a few. Uh, I know I left out a few. I think one of them was the Eternal Sunshine and the Spotless Mind or whatever. I think I left out the Aquatic Life of Steven Suzu. I think is another one. I can't remember all of them. Along Came Polly. I think was around that time. I think I just wanted to. All the movies I mentioned were like movies that I remember specifically and are very much so movies I watch today. And gotta highlight a few. All these movies are movies I still watch today. And as I get older, I can't help but to be a little more nostalgic. And I think it's very fun to look back, like, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, like as far back as possible to look at these movies and to see how ingrained they are. And just in general, like in future episodes, I like transporting back into 2004, 20 years ago, and just doing more of pop culture and more like music and stuff like that. And all these other things. Like I'll do those in future episodes, but I think it's pretty amazing. All these very memorable movies, very amazing movies that came out in 2004. It's hard to regulate emotions sometimes. There is a lot of things that come in waves with emotions, and to perfectly regulate everything and perfectly work through things is not always possible. Sometimes there's a dark cloud and heaviness that always kind of weighs on you, and it kind of has this kind of fills you with persistent feelings of sadness or of just downness. Depression is a very real thing. Depression is just described as this total flood of emptiness or this total flood of hopelessness that leads to just a constant feeling of being down. And depression is described as a mood disorder. It's something that can be agitated by a lot of things in life, but it is something that is irregular with how you handle emotions, how you handle your feelings. It's that, like I said, that persistent feeling of sadness and feeling angry at times, and just like a combination of both a lot of times. It can be very much so also filled with like that low self-esteem, that kind of self-loathing where you just feel bad about yourself and you feel because like, you have this down mood, it just encompasses everything about you and sadness is filled with those types of emotions of like hopelessness or like emptiness or like I said that slow self-esteem, that low slow concept of self. But it's hard to just say that depression is being sad. It's a flood of emotions. You can feel, angry, you can just feel frustrated. You can, sad is like I think of it's something that shows through maybe the most, that kind of hopeless emptiness kind of feeling, but very much so it's more than just sadness. Depression shows very differently in people. Some people can mask it a little easier than others, and some people just can't. I think I'm someone that I try to mask it. I suffer with depression. I have severe depression, but I don't always know how to mask it. It's something that affects the way I think and the way I talk and a lot of things about myself. And I'm not going to be able to shake it all the way. And there are ways that I can work through it, but I'm not going to be able to always shake it. I was reading something that more women are diagnosed than men are, but also women are more likely to seek treatment, for or like if they're feeling these things, then they are more likely to go seek treatment for that kind of stuff. And that's something I've always heard, and that's something that I've really ingested is that, men don't speak up in that type of way. I think it's like XYZ, it's the kind of the it's that like picture. It's like I don't know how to say. It's like putting something on. Like men don't want that put on themselves. They want to seem stronger than they are, and they want to be capable. And that's something that like everybody wants to feel capable, but it's like it's evolutionarily ingrained in men's brains. Like you don't want to feel weak. You don't want to seem weak or whatever. Even though depression isn't weak, it's just that one thing. It's that thing that holds on to you. And it's very real in both men and women when, if women are more likely to seek treatment, then what happens with men? Well, men, are more likely to kill themselves. 80% of suicides are men. It's literally it's a 5-to-1 ratio. It's as a man every minute, it's a man takes an attempt every 15 seconds. So that's where that manifests. And that's a very unfortunate thing. But to just say, like, if to know if you have depression before you even go out and seek treatment or seek any professional opinion, there are ways that maybe you can do like a depression test, if you will. However, that is like depending on like your moods. Are you in a constant like down mood? Do you have this constant persistent sadness and or like anger or this kind of loathing that holds over your head? Maybe you have a poor appetite, like you're not eating regularly or you're not eating good for yourself and things like sleep as well. If you're losing a lot of sleep and or you're sleeping through the day because you just can't sleep at night because of the endless downpouring of thoughts. Maybe you're not super active, like that's something for me. Like, I don't sleep very well, my moods are constantly changing. I don't go out and exercise because like I just like don't have this like energy even though I'm awake and I do have energy, something in my brain stops me. You know what I'm saying? So being active is like a thing too. And just those general thoughts, right? How do you feel? How do you feel about yourself? Do you hate yourself and do you feel like you're no good for nothing? You feel hopeless? Do you think about death, even like suicide and stuff like that, which is very real in depression? There are different types of like depression, very much so. There's like I was reading on it and I was struggling a little bit with like I I think I got like I didn't understand like what they meant by types. I think it's actually like diagnosable types. So I'll try to do my best with that kind of thing. But I think the most severe form that I was reading is called major depressive disorder, and that's something that where the symptoms are spanning 2 weeks or more. It's severe in the sense that it's like intermediate or it's very immediate. It's very like right now, like it's very ingraining in everything you do in the current moment type thing and like your current life. And it's like you're feeling depressed most days, right? It's like losing interest in things. It's, either you're gaining excessive weight or you're losing excessive weight, feeding into that irregular sleep thing, right? Like we were talking about. Things even extending on to like that slow thinking, fatigue, right? It's not necessarily tiredness, it's just kind of like that fatigue, the energy being drained out of you, worthlessness, guilt. There's a guilt that kind of comes behind depression, death thoughts and stuff like that. Loss of concentration, that's part of that slow thinking, that fatigue and stuff like that. Major depressive disorder is considered, like I said, a more severe form. But what most people have, wait, I skipped on it. No, yeah, okay. Most people have something that's called persistent depressive disorder. It's chronic but longer lasting. It's something that more people have something like that. But it's the same things of loss of interest, feel hopeless, lack of productivity, low self-esteem. It's all that same thing. And then there was postpartum depression, which is very specific to after childbirth. It kind of with all the general things of sadness and hopelessness and stuff like that. There can also be a restlessness, a certain like overwhelmedness that that women feel specifically, or like that you're hurting yourself or the baby, that you're not doing right. That even there's might be even a certain like disconnection from the baby, that you don't feel connected to the baby, and all the all the usual irregularities like eating and sleeping and no energy and stuff like that. And very much so like physical ailments. That's something that I've heard a lot specifically. I mean, in depression in general, but like postpartum depression, it's that kind of like your body's already weak from having just popped out a human. So women often feel that fatigue through their bodies, like that kind of like, that body aches, that kind of stuff, physical ailments. But those are just some types that I was kind of reading. And I think that depression can kind of fall in the middle of things. There's always something like the seasonal depression and things like that. Like, I think depression is just irregularity in mood and in emotional regulations type things, and it could be a chronic thing, like something that like I said, it could be that chronic thing, the persistent depressive disorder, where it's chronic, or it could be something that's super severe and in the moment, like major depressive disorder, which is I have severe depression, so I think I have major depressive disorder, and that's something like I said, I think if my life was in a little different scenario, or I just didn't have so much anxiety, I think that's what kills me the most is anxiety, but it feeds into that kind of thing. But one thing I think you can tell with depression in general is the symptoms. I think the symptoms are always usually pretty readable amongst all sort of depression. I've already kind of iterated. It's beyond just sadness, but it's a feeling of that sadness and kind of anger and that overwhelming feeling of that, at that. But also that emptiness. There's kind of sometimes you don't feel anything, even though you are sad and you're kind of angry, you don't show it. But so there's a general emptiness that you feel, kind of hopelessness that you feel. Very much so at times, even something that shows through with my depression is that there's an irritability. Very much so, there's like anger and frustration that I have, and that's something that I really I have a lot of. I'm very irritable, and I just like I'm very frustrated, and I think it's more so I'm like frustrated with myself. Like I just like I hate myself for feeling that way. That's what I think I get more frustrated with, and things do frustrate me, but it's more so it's that it's I'm irritable at myself for feeling this way, and I'm an angry person, and I think that's how my depression like mostly shows. Also like a loss of interest or pleasure in things. That makes sense. That's something that like you don't want. Like I very much so don't want to like draw or write when I'm very depressed and when I'm feeling down. Like I don't want to at all. When I'm pissed off at something, I can't even think creatively. Yeah, sleep disturbances, like I've said, lack of energy, that fatigue, very much so, like just a total draining of things, not just sometimes you force yourself to do things so you get tired from that, but just existing. It feels like when you're constantly flooded with that things and you're using all your energy to like block out those thoughts, it can lead to that fatigue, very much so. But the things with like I said, anxiety, I think, is what feeds into my depression more, and so I have that kind of agitation and it and a constant like restlessness in my head. I've had conversations where people were with people that are like, you talk about that inner voice in your head, right? And not everybody has it, and some people do, but it's not very loud. My inner voice is crazy loud. I always have something talking back at me, like constantly talking at me, and it leaves me restless. It leaves me very like I'm always feels like I'm stressed and tense about something. And it's my voice talking at me. You know what I'm saying? Very much so. It's like guilt is something that I feel. That's what I'm saying. I get very irritable and angry that I feel that I'm feeling that way, and so I feel shameful and guilty, and that like I shouldn't be depressed. Like, what am I depressed about? Type thing. And when you fixate on like on the past failures, it can lead into things like depression leads into maybe actions that you didn't choose to do, and you lash out in certain ways. So it can pass those past like discretions and those past mistakes can only further that depression. It just makes you fixating on past failures and stuff like that, and leading in. I mean, furthermore, like I'm just like I'm just spewing a little bit of everything with like, I mean, like I said, like with trouble with thinking and a big thing is like those that thinking being replaced with terrible thoughts about yourself and suicidal thoughts and death thoughts. And not all depression, I think, is leads in that kind of suicidal thinking, but very much so a real symptom that can happen, you know? And um depression is it's a mood disorder. It's an irregulation that sometimes it can be like a maybe a genetic thing or it can be all these other things, but there are a multitude of causes. Sometimes there's external causes that just bring on that kind of sadness and you just don't I think most of the time though, what causes depression is there's a difference in brain chemistry. There's a difference in like how your brain is structured. That's a genetic thing. I think people are born a certain way. Their brains are born to how their parents' brains are born and how their parents' brains are born. So if depression is something that is like ran through your family, it can be very much so inherited through genetics. And I look at like my dad and I look at my mom and I look at like my grandparents or something like that and other people in my family, and it's like depression runs through. It definitely 100%, not all of us, but a lot of us. But it's one of those things where even if you're like substance user and you're at the point to a substance abuser, that can lead into like depression. You're kind of chasing a high because it kind of takes you out of certain moments of life, and then inevitably everything kind of encompasses into a low, you know? Or even other medical conditions. There's certain like, if you're like social disorders, like social anxiety or like ADHD or OCD or things like that, multitude of different orders, you know what I'm saying? There's certain increases in risk of developing or triggering that stuff too. Like, it's you may not be a very depressed person, but there's things that can not only feed into that, but that can lead into the continuing development of depression into something bigger. That kind of low self-esteem. If you're constantly someone who kind of thinks shittily of themselves, like me, sorry for my language, it's hard to like feel like there's something good going on. It leads to that hopeless emptiness kind of feeling. If you're too dependent on other people, something maybe I struggle with a little bit too is like I don't have independence all the time. I want to be an independent person, but sometimes I am too dependent. And so failure at trying to just take care of myself like makes me feel depressed. If you're pessimistic, you're self-critical, that kind of leads to that general hopeless view, that kind of general anger that you'll feel. Very much so. Like, I think one of the bigger things is like we think about like stressful, traumatic events. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's something that very much so leads into depression. And when something super extreme where you can't, you know, fully comprehend what's going on and your emotions go into that flux, depression can lead in, very much so. Maybe even, for some people with like socioeconomic status, like you feel like you're not super popular or you feel like you're not making an X amount of money or you're not around, like, you're not at the place you should be in life, can bring on depression too. So there's like a multitude of things that can kind of cause it or kind of lead into the development of that depression. Tons of things. And certain things, like certain complications that can come from like depression, like it not only affects the way you think, but it can affect everything on the outside too. So, like obesity, that's something that can happen. It doesn't happen with everybody, but also an extreme weight loss can happen. Pain and illness, something like actually feeling physical pain, but also like feeling sick to your stomach and feeling like sick all the time, nauseous or whatever. Drug abuse, alcohol abuse, on the inside with like anxiety, it can cause anxiety. It can, or like, and be by with through anxiety, depression can be exasperated, which is something that happens with me. Panic disorders, social phobias, social conflicts, very much so me. Like I have social anxiety very bad, so like I just don't want to be around other people very often. But also that leads to me social isolating, which hurts that, which leads into depression and complicates that as well. And then constant suicidal feelings and self-harm. If you're someone that feeds into that, that complicates depression. And it's like a constant cycle of depression feeds into that, and then you feeding into those feelings feeds back into depression. It's the ultimate death loop in a way. It kind of feels that way. But there are maybe certain treatments and maybe certain preventional like things you can take towards depression. With treatments, antidepressants. I took antidepressants for like a whole year until I stopped. There's it's I don't know. it made me feel numb. It wasn't it didn't make me feel it kind of stopped the sadness, but it didn't make me feel anything else. But a very big thing is like you also have to increase like your serotonins and dopamines and stuff like that. That's the whole thing is like when you're depressed, you have a depletion and almost a total zero of serotonin and dopamine. Anything that boosts that self good feeling, that satisfactory feeling in your body. You got to increase those kind of things. And also therapy is a very big thing. Like going to talk to professionals is a very big thing. Or even sharing your experiences with people that are also depressed can help and maybe show you what you need to do. I know that like lifestyle changes like exercise and setting your limits on how on what you do and who you interact with, taking care of yourself is things that can help as well. It's very much so things that lead into that lifestyle change. And with preventionary things like you can always just take control of stress in certain ways. It's hard, but with setting certain boundaries and certain limits to yourself, that can control the stress. And don't be afraid to reach out to people, like I said, and don't be afraid to get treatment. And especially if maybe you can recognize it at earlier signs, that can help you. It's just important to always keep a certain long term maintenance with yourself and take care of yourself and constantly feed yourself with those dopamines and that good feeling and try to take yourself out of that depressive mood. Like I said, depression is not just sadness, it's an over encompassing feeling of persistent emptiness and hopelessness, and you're constantly in a down mood that soon will perpetuate a bad feeling over and over again. And then you'll have that self loathing and that low self esteem, and it's hard to pull yourself out of that. And it's something that I have, and it's very much so exasperated by like my anxiety. And I can't, if I don't talk to people and I don't think good about myself and I don't take care of myself, it's only going to lead into depression. As for everybody else, and if you are a depressed individual, if you're someone who suffers with any sort of form of depression, seek any sort of help you can. It's not weak to be depressed. It's okay to be vulnerable. I just suggest that everybody seek help and don't let depression take over your life. When it comes to getting a job or searching for a new job, inevitably there will be a time when you will have to interview for that job. I'm someone that like I like working. I don't mind doing any job. There is nothing that I think I'm super limited at doing. One of my biggest anxieties comes with that interviewing process. There's a certain, person or a certain version of yourself you kind of have to put forward when you're doing these job interviews, and you want to impress the person that's hiring you, and you got to make yourself seem like the most like, the most correct, applicant for this position, whatever position you're trying to fill. And like I said, whether it's a, high level job or a low level job, however you define that kind of thing, you want nonetheless to impress the person that's hiring you. But job interviews are tough. And I think a lot of people, they don't struggle with that stuff. Some people have that confidence, and maybe, you're someone that like, you don't take rejection very seriously. I'm someone that I hate rejection. And for some people, it's like they have the mentality that like if this job doesn't work out, there'll be one tomorrow and there'll be one down the line. And that's a good way to look at it. Nonetheless, it's a very nerve wracking thing. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, I understand that I'm trying to show you why I'm good for the job, and I'm trying to show you kind of, who I am as a person, and you'll kind of get the gist of what I do based off of that kind of stuff and how I might function at the job and how I might function with other people at the job. But it's kind of like, especially in some moments, like I don't ever want to be like, what do I say? Do I lie and I try to make myself, most impressive? I think we've all like lied at job interviews to make ourselves like seem a little bit better or like to get a little more money. You might have said that like at your last job you might have been making 15, but you said you made 17 type thing, or you got along with everybody, but you really didn't. I think everybody does that a little bit. And I think it's kind of up for, I think it's okay. It's only going to come back to hurt you if you let it come back to hurt you. If you lie and then let it really be known, like, yeah, that's going to hurt you. But in a sense of trying to get a job and trying to like put yourself in a better position or or a different position in the workforce, I don't think that hurts. I don't think that hurts at all. You want to make yourself seem the best option. And I think like if I was interviewing, if I was doing an interview, I would probably look for that kind of thing too. I would hate to then find out that these people were lying about their thing, but if maybe the right questions were asked too. I think like in I've been through a couple different versions of interviews, and they do it differently. Some people are very much so just like they kind of want to know who you are, like in like what's your availability type thing, but some people want to know a little more. They want to know about your like schooling or your education and your hobbies and what you do outside of work. And I think sometimes there's like a generalization with like, it's like how well do you work with others and what's your team working ethic? Like when this happens, what are you going to be able to do and things like that. Maybe it doesn't even hurt to like necessarily like maybe it's like a good thing to practice for a job interview or do a little research on a job. Like you would think that unless you're like in a super need of a job and you just doesn't matter necessarily, you would think you do a little bit of research, or at least you're going into a field or into something that you have awareness of. So you don't maybe need to do a lot of research, but maybe you do enough of that research. It's like flashcards type thing where you just kind of memorize the right answers. I just like that's the most awkward thing for me. I get very nervous with job interviews because like I do want to impress this person, but also like I shouldn't hold it on myself that if they don't not impressed with me, that someone on the line wouldn't be impressed with me. Sometimes like you're just talking to someone who just doesn't ask the questions you felt like you should have been asked, or like you just didn't know how to answer these person's questions, but maybe a different interviewer asks a different series of things that kind of feed into who you are. Also, like if you do enough job interviews, you kind of maybe like know what's going to be asked. And so if you didn't get hired at this one job, you know that you answered XYZ and it's just not correct or like it didn't feed into what they wanted. And then like you go to this other job, you do ABC and it's fine. And they hire you because of that. I think in general in life, like you want to try to present yourself as a capable person and you want to try to present yourself like you're a little bit better than you are. You don't want to have to impress people, but you should just try to hold yourself to a high standard, even though you might let yourself down. It don't hurt to try to make yourself seem like a good person or try to portray yourself to be a good person for your own sake, more so. I think if I could just get past that, that's my whole thing with the workforce. Like, you know, if I could just not interview for a job, if I knew like, hey Gunther, like there's a job for you that's gonna pay, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, whatever a month, and all you have to do is just show up tomorrow and meet the manager and you're hired. Like that's my type of job. That's my type of thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, if I could like job interview by like working, like training on the spot, some things do that, like internships and things like that. But I don't want like a month or like a year internship. I'd rather do like if I could work a week, like that's like in managers in training when you're training as a manager in like the restaurant business specifically. Sometimes like you may not like get paid right off the bat. Well, you'll get paid a certain like pay because you're in training or whatever. But it's not like what your salary would be or whatever. That's kind of my thing is like I'd rather just be like thrown into the thing because I'm not a very social person as I talked in with the social cues topic. Like, not a very social person, and I find it hard to interact with other people sometimes. And like, I don't want to, I want to impress people, but I don't want to go around just impressing people all the time and like have people put a view on me that I can't live up to, type thing. I just wish that like there was like a way to always be able to prove it type thing beyond just that job interview where like if I'm not comfortable with the job interview, if you can just give me like 2 days of work and like throw me into it, give me the rundown basically, and let me work. And if it doesn't work out, then fire me. Then let me go. Don't pay me then. Like I tried to do my best. Then I'd rather do that. Like I'll put in a couple days of free work just to prove that I can do the job. That ain't a struggle for me. The work is literally not a struggle for me. I want to do a topic like in the future where it talking about like what jobs I can feasibly seeing like the extremist or most like blue collary jobs or like what would I be willing to do? What I would I not be willing to do? Because like I'd be willing to do a lot. Like I remember like There's like a video that I saw recently, like some dude's job, right, to like go change the light bulbs on like those big like 100 feet, 200 feet hours or whatever, and like I'll do that. If I got to do it like twice a year, get paid $60,000 for it or whatever, like I'll freaking do it. Give me the freaking ropes and the chains and or whatever and the hooks, and I'll go up there. I'm afraid of heights too. I don't mess around with that. I like risking my life is like, like it's like to what point? If I'm making good money, whatever, man. Like I don't know. My life is always worth more than a job. There's not a job that would be more worth than like my life. Unless you think of like a job as serving other people. Like if you're someone like a lot of people are counting on you type thing. Yeah, I might, my life might not be seen that important because then I'm directly affecting everybody else's type thing and yada 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 type thing. I don't know how what job has that big of a meaning, president. You know what I'm saying? That's my whole thing is like job interviews are tough. They're, sometimes you can just lie and bullshit your way through, excuse my language, and I've done that. I've definitely like just tried to play the best version of myself, and sometimes you just don't get hired, and that can make you question whether your best version was your best version. But also, it makes you think that like sometimes job interviewers can maybe think that like notice that you're faking it because at one time, job interviewers, people who are hiring for a certain position, they were getting hired into a position at one time too, and they had to do the same exact thing. And that's my whole thing is like some places they want to know a little bit about you, and some places just need you to fill an application and just be available. And I know that like I don't know, like I'm kind of running back on things like as an employer myself, if I was like hiring people, like my whole thing is that I'd want people that can be that are comfortable with doing the jobs that interact well with others, and even if you've never done this job before, a willingness to do the job. Like I want people who are kind of open to interpreting the job in different ways and not just saying like if you're a cashier, you're just doing cashier work. Like maybe you need to go take out trash and maybe you need to go bus tables and wipe things down and like try to people you have people who have that mindset of like, well, like I know what my position is, but if I can do things outside my position to help the greater good, then that's what it is. Because that's who I am as a person. That's what I look at as like a job interviewer, and I wish that, like I said, I wish that like I could just like go into a place and be like, "Hey, can I work here?" And they're just like, "Yeah, yeah, just come in tomorrow." And then, like I said, if it's just like one of those things where I have to do like a 2 day no pay run of just trying to like do the job and show what I'm worth, I'll freaking do it. I have no problem with that. But I think everybody struggles maybe a little bit with job interviews, not necessarily with like a social aspect, but trying to present yourself and trying to get the job. You're like trying to win a prize basically. So job interviews can be very nerve wracking, and whether it's a job you really want or not, you want to try to impress the person that's hiring you, and you always want to try to do your best to be suitable. Alrighty, friends, that's really all I have to say about that. Episode 49 done. I appreciate y'all tuning in as always. If you want to listen to this episode or any of my past episodes or any future episodes for that matter, I always make sure to upload on YouTube and Spotify. If you find anything I say enjoyable or relatable in any way, then I always appreciate a little support. You could subscribe to my podcast on YouTube or Spotify, as well as follow me on a few different social medias. I have a Instagram. I also have a Facebook, and then I'm also on Twitter. I'll make sure to link all those in the description below, as well as like my any of my channel or any like bio descriptions in general. I'll try to link those. Yeah, nonetheless, I always appreciate the chance to get on the microphone and talk to y'all. I'm getting close. Like I said, I've got a couple more episodes until I'm going to take a break, and I'm rethinking the podcast and maybe rethinking about how I want to just do things in general. Maybe the podcast stops. I don't know. I don't think it will, but I want to try to feed my creativity otherwise and maybe, get into writing and art and maybe try to feed into that more. Whatever. I love y'all. Don't forget to tell someone else you love them as well. Make sure to show up for yourselves every single day and be excellent to each other.